What's up, guys? I'm EJ. I'm joined by Kendall, and thank you all for checking out this edition of the Uncommitted Podcast, Episode 8. It's been a little bit of a while since we've done an Uncommitted podcast talking high school hoops, but as you guys know, I think this is probably one of the best places you'll find conversations about college basketball recruiting, whether it be on YouTube or anywhere. And Kendall, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. A lot has happened, not just over the past several months, but we've been on a mini hiatus while we've been doing other content, particularly superhero stuff. There's been a lot of stuff happening over the last few weeks. So this is a great time, I think, to get on to do another Uncommitted podcast, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it was always we've been talking about doing an episode of Uncommitted EJ for the past 2 months, pretty much since the season ended. But really when the tournament started, we were talking about should we do one before the tournament, should we do one after the tournament, but the problem that we kept running into was that the transfer portal has been so chaotic, and so there never felt like a good time to do it. There were so many great times to do it because it's like, oh man, this guy committed, and this guy just transferred, and this coach just left, and this coach just got hired. But we realized we should probably sit back, let everything kind of play itself out. It's still not done, which we'll talk about later in this show. There's still plenty of storylines that still need to unfold. But now felt like a pretty decent time to kind of recap all of the chaos that has been this college basketball all season, as well as preview the rest of the chaos to come this this off season.
Yeah, because as you said, even though a lot of dust has settled, not all of the dust has settled. There's plenty of storylines still to play out, and we'll get to a lot of some of the stuff happening in regards to the impact on college basketball next season. But I want to talk about the top high school player heading into next high school season, Emoni Bates, because he had a pretty eventful weekend during the last weekend of April. So, like I said, it was very eventful. Emoni Bates, 2022 number one player, phenom, had what observers would maybe consider a subpar showing at the Midwest Mania high school tournament that happened just a couple of weeks ago, where in some way he was outshined by another top 2022 prospect, Jalen Duren, from Mount Bird Academy. Those guys actually had their teams play against each other, and Duren, who's a 6'10 center, was actually guarding Bates in those games and did a really good job defending him, and perhaps maybe displayed some weaknesses in Bates' game that he's got to continue to improve on. And then following that, showing that weekend, Bates also then decommitted from Michigan State, which I feel like, I need, the everybody who may have thought that this Michigan State thing was going to happen, I think they all got to eat a lot of crow. Because, when we did this show, maybe in the last time, or it wasn't the last time, it was a couple times prior to that, when he made the commitment, I said, I don't think there's any way this is going to stick. And as we see now, it hasn't stuck. So the early indication is that a lot of people think he may be eyeing the pros, but then there's report of interest in Texas, interest in Tennessee. Memphis has offered a scholarship. So we still got a lot of situations to play out with Bates' recruitment. Which of these do you think are the bigger headline? Do you think his off weekend playing at Midwest Media was more of a story? Or do you think the decommitment?
Well, it's funny. I saw there were Michigan State fans that a lot of them took this as, oh, well, whatever. We didn't need him. He was never coming here anyway. I mean, first of all, I'm like, that's not what they were saying when he committed. Let's keep it 100. But second of all, it's like, yeah, we lost, the guy who's the next KD and supposed to be the next LeBron just decommitted, and we're just shrugging our shoulders. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll be okay. It's like, I don't know about that, fam.
Yeah, a little bit strange. I mean, they'll recover. They'll certainly be fine, but it is a blow. Look, I mean, I think the bigger story to me has to be the matchup between him and Jalen Duren. That's not to say that about Emoni Bates that he's not, going to be, an NBA player, or he's not a one and done, or he's not a lottery pick, or he's not a top 5 pick. But just that the gap between Emoni Bates and the rest of the class of 2022 is not as big as has been advertised. I think that weekend, showed us what some of the things that the pandemic affected when it came to grassroots basketball where you had a player in Jalen Duren. Now, look, people, I mean, he's been on the radar. It's not like nobody's ever heard of Jalen Duren. He was a star in Philly, played at Roman Catholic High School, and decided to transfer to Montverde and was dominant. Won the Geico Nationals this season at Montverde. But, you know, we didn't have any AAU basketball last summer for the most part. So all of the Emoni Bates is way above or way ahead of everyone else in his class conversations is based almost entirely on 2 AAU summers ago and then high school stuff. And that's not how the game has typically been evaluated. So there's just so many guys like a Jalen Duren who's obviously improved his game. You know, there's other guys in the class of 2022 that people are certainly intrigued by. Dariq Whitehead's another kid that plays at Montverde, another kid from the Northeast that people are intrigued by. There are other guys in class 2022 that are going to be one-and-done guys that could play for the G League Ignite, could go to Australia if they want to. Like, there's a lot of NBA prospects in that class, just like there are every class. But this is particularly going to be one of the better classes that we've seen, which is why there's been so many people intrigued by that 2022 NBA draft, assuming that these guys would be guys that can come straight out of high school on top of the Chet Holmgren guys. You know, we don't know if that rule is going to change, but it's a very good class, and the conversation has been almost solely on Emoni Bates, not to mention Victor Wembanyama, you know, the big man out of France, who's not, I mean, if you're talking NBA, like he might be the number one prospect in that class. But, you know, that there's just been so much missed basketball from a scouting perspective that the narrative has gone on for so long that Bates is just far and away the guy. I mean, there's been the narrative he's the best player in high school basketball, which I feel like I said early on in this podcast that, you know, or in one of our YouTube videos, that it's just not. That was when people were saying that when Cade Cunningham and Jalen Green were still in high school, that Emoni Bates is the best player in high school basketball. I couldn't say that about a kid that was 15. And that's unfair expectations on that guy and unfair pressure on that guy. You got to have an honest evaluation, and the honest evaluation is he's got areas to improve, but you know he has a talent. He's got a skill level that is uncanny for his size and for his age. But he's got areas to improve, just like a lot of players. So look, I think that was the headline. I mean, Bates decommitting, probably, like you said, it ends up being where the buck kind of, ended up where we expected it to end up. The question is, do we take anything from teams like Texas, Tennessee, and Memphis offering scholarships? Is that them feeling like they seriously have a shot at getting him? You know, Jeff Goodman put out the report that Bates there's mutual interest between Texas and Bates. I would assume there's mutual interest, or at least interest, from every college program in the country in Emoni Bates. Whether or not it's mutual, I guess that's the newsworthy thing. But I don't think Goodman had to say mutual. I think we knew that Texas was interested. But regardless, that is an interesting thing as well. Texas obviously a new coaching staff, so with Chris Beard now, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later. But yeah, to me, I think the news is Jalen Duren, who the guy looks like he's just chiseled from. Yeah,
he looks like Dwight Howard.
He looks like Dwight Howard.
Yeah, I don't mean high school Dwight Howard. I mean, he looks like Dwight Howard, like maybe his second year in the league. Like he looks like Dwight Howard.
Right. It's scary.
Yeah, it is. Like to me, I think the bigger headline is still the decommitment. I do feel like, look, I think you made great points about the fact that we didn't have AU ball last year, and the high school season we had was almost really not one. Like, some teams didn't play, some teams did. There were fake schools playing. It wasn't real high school basketball. So, when you made the point about how, we made the assessment of Bates being number one, really 3 years ago. But, for right now, it's based off of basically stuff from last summer. We got to remember that, OJ Mayo in his junior year was the next Kobe Bryant. and he was the number one player by far, nobody close. And then a young guard from Chicago started lighting it up in his AAU circuit, and then his high school senior year. And by the time he got to the end of the season, it wasn't O.J. Mayo who was the number one player coming out of high school that year. It was Derrick Rose. And it's not to say that Bates isn't a stud. I think he is. He's a guy with his size and scoring ability and shooting touch. They're just almost unseen. Like there just aren't many kids like that.
The range.
Yeah, in the range. I mean, the guy can shoot from 30 feet out like easily. Like he's a special player. I'm not dissing him in any way. But I think that is a good point that a lot of these other guys who also may have been working on their games. The fact that he didn't have a real high school season and real games, game experience during this pandemic. Maybe I'm not saying his game slipped, but maybe the growth that you would expect maybe didn't happen as much as we would have hoped for. But with that being said, he's still a superstar. I mean, I think he's still the presumptive number one pick. We talk about 2 years from now, though that's still way too early to start talking about that stuff. I think if anything, this weekend was more of a wake-up call to maybe not just be calling every great young kid the next LeBron. It's just LeBron's a special athlete and a Hall of Fame of the Hall of Fame. Like he's elite level basketball player, and we shouldn't just be throwing his name out for anybody. Bates is special, but let the kid continue to grow and improve on his game, and let's maybe temper some of the expectations. I think the decommitment is interesting only because Bates, if pro ball really is leading the clubhouse right now in regards to where he's going to go, I mean, this would be obviously the biggest win for the G League if we're assuming it's the G League. And maybe a real tug of war where if somehow NCAA loses out to G League for Emoni Bates, the one guy that everyone wants to see play college ball, more so than any young guy that's been coming out of high school for the last 4 or 5 years. If that guy chooses G League over NCAA, do not be surprised if that becomes the motivation to get whatever NIL deal done to just get that out the way. I think that might be the tipping point where if we can't provide this kind of what we provide as universities, the exposure, the TV deals, the marketability, we can't provide that to him and he decides G League is the better option. I do not be surprised if the next season, because the NIL gets signed, because I know Florida was supposed to go through, and all of a sudden it got pulled for some random reason. Nobody seems to know why. People on both sides of the aisle are upset. The NCAA is slow walking this thing as much as they can. If that happens, they will not slow walk it anymore, because that would be a catastrophe. If the best player, arguably since LeBron James, that these people are saying, decides that I'm not going to play in college, I'm supposed to, because of this one and done deal, I'm going to play in the G League. That would be a disaster.
Well, somebody ask Master P, because Master P seems to have a source that's telling him that this deal is going to be done in August, because he claims that his son, Hercy Miller, who played at Minnehaha with Jalen Suggs and Chet Holmgren, just committed to Tennessee State. Shout out to the HBCUs out there. Hercy Miller could have played anywhere. He's a really good player. But he decided to go to Tennessee State. Master P came out and said, I got $1 million endorsement deal lined up for my son once this NIL gets signed in August. We're ready to sign it in August. And people were like, August? When is that? When do we know? Do we know something? Does he know something that we don't? But
it's possible because, first of all, Master P is he's an exceptional businessman, and business people tend to know, as we talked about, like we know with LeBron going to the Lakers, we talk about all the time that example of how business people and Hollywood people knew it years before. Yeah. I guess we were convinced it was going to happen. Man, Master P, he has the connections to know if this is going to go down. I just know, there was a strong push for Florida to just sign their deal yesterday, and all of a sudden it just disappeared. And again, like I said, people on both sides of the aisle were like, "What the hell happened?" So I think there are some figures that are still trying to slow walk this thing. And again, I'm telling you right now, if somehow they don't have this thing signed and Bates decides I'm going to the G League, this thing's going to be a wrap. And that's why I think this is a big deal.
The G League Ignite situation is interesting because when you look at what happened this season. Obviously, they didn't play a normal season. They didn't expect to have the G League Ignite being played, in a bubble, playing 15, 20 games in a month span, and that's it. But I can't say it was a roaring success for guys like Jalen Green, John Kuminga. It wasn't a failure, but from an exposure
It didn't
standpoint,
raise their profile on any level.
yeah, it didn't raise their profile on any level. Didn't really raise their draft stock
Yeah,
on
it
any
didn't
level.
raise their draft stock. I agree.
Like a guy like Jalen Suggs passed Jalen Green, not because Jalen Green looked terrible. Like he played pretty good, but he just got passed because just the
Yeah,
momentum,
he was hitting half
the
court
hype.
shots in Final Four games
Yeah, in
where
NCAA
millions of
tournament.
people are watching. I'm sorry, Jalen Green playing a
Jalen
Tuesday
Green has no
afternoon
chance.
game. Jalen Green playing Tuesday afternoon on NBA TV or NBA.com. He's just not getting that kind of
The
exposure.
Disney bubble, yeah, it isn't gonna get people excited. So, and again, it's not gonna be like that next year. But even if you're not in the Disney bubble, playing in Delaware against the 70, the whatever they are, the 66ers or whatever they call, like that is not. I don't know if that's exciting Emoni Bates. So right now, the NBA is at a real crossroads when it comes to the G League Ignite. They just got Fang Zembo, kid from Gonzaga who decommitted, went to the G League. They just got Michael Foster, 5-star from Georgia. Michael Foster is more akin to the Isaiah Todd from last year. Not like a guy who we expect to be a top 5, top 10 pick necessarily. Could be, I mean, when you're a top 15, top 20 recruit, like you could be a top 10 pick, but not like a consensus guy. A lot of people expect Jaden Hardy to end up in the G League, and if that happens, now you do have a guy who is a legitimate top 3, NBA draft prospect. But they need a face. They had Jalen Green this year, and they had Kuminga, 2 guys that were that top 5 kind of guy. And it wasn't the slam dunk that they hoped. So right now, I mean, Emoni Bates wouldn't be able to go to the NBA next year, as far as we know. But I mean, do they try and get him for 2 years? As far as we know, there's nothing stopping them from getting Emoni Bates this year, and then seeing what happens the year after. We also had the overtime elite league that was started up, that was announced over the past month or two. Kevin Ollie's going to be the coach. They're saying they're going to pay every player like 6 figures. There's a lot of competition right now in that space, the non-college basketball space. We already know that Australia has their system, and we already know these teams in Europe are willing to pay as well. So it's a scary time, I think, for the G League Ignite. They need to hit on a major guy right now.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if they try and poach somebody that is either committed, like they did with Dacian Nix, or a guy like Jaden Hardy, or a junior like Emoni Bates.
And I'll say this last thing on Bates: if it indeed it is a college and he decides to stay and play 1 year college basketball, I would love to see him playing at Texas. I think that Chris Beard, there's a lot of momentum with that program. I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later. But you gotta love the legacy of KD going there, and this guy being the closest thing people feel like to being Kevin Durant. If he didn't also went to Texas, obviously different coach, which is why Rick Barnes in Tennessee feels like maybe he has a shot as well. That's why he's trying to get in the mix. But if that is indeed where he goes, I think that would be super dope.
I'm sure Penny Hardaway is telling him that he reminds him of himself, which is cap. Because he's told pretty much. I feel like he's told every recruit that he's ever recruited. Yeah, you're according to the recruits who it's saying in interviews. Yeah, Penny told me I reminded him of himself, and I'm like, come on now. I've heard that now with about 6 or 7 guys in Memphis recruited. So, but look, whatever works. If it gets Emoni Bates to Memphis, all power to you.
Exactly. Let's talk about the Zags now. So Gonzaga, they may have lost national championship and the chance at an undefeated season, but the Zags already come to the next season as the favorites to win it all. And thanks to some big commitments, they certainly may be able to have that opportunity. So last month, they got swingman 5-star Hunter Sallis. They also nabbed #1 overall player in the 2021 class, Chet Holmgren. So with those two additions coming to Spokane, and Mark Few's already deep roster, the Zags now come in as a powerhouse this season yet again. But the question I have, Kendall, is: do you expect the Zags to be this kind of powerhouse in recruiting for the foreseeable future? We always talk about what schools are the hot schools. How do you take advantage of your run? Seems like Mark Few certainly has done that with the Zags being a preeminent program for the last they've been preeminent program for 20 years. But in terms of like the elite for the last 5 years, definitely. How long do you see this run for the Zags? Because this is just not, even when they were recruiting well, they weren't getting 2 top 10 guys in a class. That's just never been Gonzaga. But between last year getting Jalen Suggs and this year now Holmgren and Sallis, it seems like it's a new day.
Well, what I think is happening with Gonzaga is I think they're really starting to hit on they're starting to feel the effects of that national championship run that they had years ago with Nigel Williams-Goss and Shamrock Karnowski, where they lost to North Carolina. And those guys who were, maybe in middle school at the time or early high school or probably middle school that were watching that team probably didn't know who Gonzaga was. Watch college basketball like every basketball fan. That was like, oh, okay, Gonzaga. Keep them on the radar. Now I've heard of them. And then now when you're the guy coming up, and you remember North Carolina and Gonzaga were playing the national title, and you continue to see like Gonzaga's always in the Final Four, or always in the maybe not in the Final Four, but always in the tournament, and always a high seed.
Second weekend, you really start like 7 years in a row, 6-7 years in a row. They've constantly #1 in the country, so the visibility is there.
The visibility is there, and now they're really starting to capitalize on it.
And then and also the NBA pipeline is now really kind of there now. Look at Domantas Sabonis isn't a 2-time NBA All-Star back-to-back years.
Yeah, you can start using money and saying, look, our players have earned upwards of $80 million in the last 5 years, something crazy. I mean, Calipari talks about, my players have earned $1 billion in contracts. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. I mean, you've had a lot of players. Yes, they've earned a lot of money. I mean, that's not going to one player. So all right, but look, a player hears that, and that is intriguing. It's like, all right, I want to be a part of that situation too. So, I think the NBA part of it also is a big factor, and I think that'll continue to be a big factor. When you're talking about a guy like Jalen Suggs, if he ends up being the #1 pick in the draft, he's not gonna be #1. But if he ends up being a top 5 pick, now you're talking about a guy that guys are gonna want to say, I want to be the next Jalen Suggs, and I could be the next Jalen Suggs at Gonzaga. I mean, as a Memphis fan, I saw it with Derrick Rose. I mean, I remember Karan Iverson was a 5-star, and he said in an interview at one point when he committed to Memphis, why are you going to Memphis? And he talked about how, D Rose went there. And, that he was like, I wanted to go to Kentucky, play for John Calipari, but that didn't work out. But Memphis was the next closest thing. You're going to have a lot of guys that, say that, I want to play for Mark Few. I want to play at Gonzaga. So, I want to be the next Jalen Suggs. So, and I think we kind of already seen that a little bit with Hunter Sallis and Chet Holmgren. So, yeah, I think that this isn't something that is going to go away, but will go away. And look, this is a sad acknowledgement for Gonzaga fans, I'm sure. We may talk about this a little bit later. But look, Tommy Lloyd, obviously, top assistant, did decide to go to Arizona. I'm fairly confident that I think their international pipeline is pretty much going to be gone. Doesn't mean they won't ever get an international guy again, but it won't be it won't be the same. All the guys that they're going to really, really want to get are going to go to Arizona.
Well, look, I mean, Pavel Zakharov, who was a big time recruit coming in, he just transferred. Balo, also a big time recruit, he just transferred. Those are 2 international prospects that the Zags really were excited about. Neither guy necessarily. We
thought Sambo Zhang.
Zhang didn't even.
Greatest Chinese prospect, Yijian Lian.
Yeah,
committed to
eager to get on
Gonzaga
campus.
in part because of the Rudy factor, but also clearly in part because of Tommy Lloyd. And
Yeah.
once Tommy Lloyd leaves, like, I'm going to the G League. Not, I mean, no disrespect to Fanbo's name, but I don't know if him going to the G League is the right move, considering he's not like he's a 5-star guy. I saw Kai Soto do it this past season. I don't know if he drafted, um, but from a relationship standpoint, does he still want to go to Gonzaga? You know, and if you don't want to go to Gonzaga, where are you gonna go? So yeah, no, that's tough. But
Yeah.
at this point, they
Yeah. I
got grown
mean,
it. They don't need to rely on it.
yeah. I mean, it's certainly a concern potentially. I think they'll still keep it around. I think that they've hit too much. They have too many connections. They have too much. Their name carries too well overseas. Um, I think you'll still see them get some really good overseas players, but I think perhaps for Gonzaga, there's been a reliance on overseas players to compete. You know, when we say why have they been this top-notch team, it's been twofold. It's been the transfers, and it's been their international recruits. I mean, the American players they've recruited over the last 10 years, they've been very good players, but but before Jalen Suggs, we weren't talking about a top 5 guy or top 10 guy. You know, he'd be a guy they would get that they know is going to be a 4-year kid that would develop into a really great player by their senior year. But sometimes those guys weren't even the star players on the team. So, to me, there may be a shift where maybe you'll see them get more American players and they look more like a conventional program. But I still think that you'll see them still get high-level recruits. And there are going to be players that are going to be touted internationally. And I think Gonzaga is going to be, first in line for every single one of those guys if they want them. The question may be they might not need those guys anymore because they've relied on them so much. It may be like, hey, man, they're not having a great center they had this year. They're like, look, I mean, we're getting Chet Holmgren. Like, it might not make sense to recruit a guy like that. And that's
going to be a real test. We'll see if they'll be first in line. Again, they might be second in line, which is not an issue. But Tommy Lloyd was the player getter overseas.
Yeah,
and now he's the head coach at Arizona.
Yeah,
which is a blue blood program in the West Coast. I mean, we saw Kirk Kriisa.
The weather's a lot better. The weather's a lot better in Tucson than it is in Spokane.
It might be a little easier to sell that. Bigger school. Some guys aren't interested in that kind of stuff, obviously, but some guys are. But yeah, I mean, Tommy Lloyd's going to be a real factor in the West Coast. It's not gonna. Gonzaga's not worried about that. They'll be willing to lose a couple guys to Arizona if it means you get more guys like Chet Holmgren and Hunter Sallis. So what it means for them in the short term is, I mean, look, Chet Holmgren. I mean, the guy who can't ignore the fact he's the number 1 player in the country. I mean, this is quite the accomplishment for your Gonzaga Bulldogs. I mean, we talked about him when they played, his AAU program, played against Emoni Bates' AAU program. And he was the best player on the floor. And it was really a coming out party for the country, the basketball community, into who this Chet Holmgren guy is, when a lot of people were watching and tuning in to see Emoni Bates. I mean, Skip Bayless.
And I think even the people who
was tweeting about it.
And I think
tweeting about Chet Holmgren going to Gonzaga.
And I think the people who were even who knew about Chet Holmgren but were watching the game were extremely skeptical, because you see his frame and his size and you're like, is this guy really going to be able to be? Is he really the number 1 guy? I was one of the people making those same, points when we talked about it on this podcast, where I talked about I think he may be a little more raw. He's number 1 in terms of potential, but is he number 1 in terms of player? Yeah, after that game, there was no debate about whether or not he actually could hoop now. He's a 100% stud. True basketball unicorn. I mean, guy 7'1" that could legitimately play point guard and shooting guard. Like, that's just, I've never seen a player like that before.
Has a pace to him like a guard.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, but there have been bigs that can dribble. Anthony Davis can dribble, but he's not, there's a whole, Anthony Davis was a point guard in high school. Yeah, but was he ranked? Was he just played?
Right,
no disrespect, not ranking every day, but he wasn't the number 1 point guard in the country.
He wasn't going to Kentucky. He wasn't going to Kentucky to run the 1. Let's just say that.
Yeah, exactly. Anthony Davis doesn't necessarily play like a point guard, but like Chet Holmgren, I'm not saying Chet Holmgren is Magic Johnson, but he has a pace to him where he doesn't play sped up, and he can run the pick and roll. His handles almost legitimately like a guard. It's impressive stuff, and I think a lot of that is development because I don't think he was like that 2 years ago, but I think he had maybe pieces of it.
Yeah.
But I think playing with Jalen Suggs really, when you're playing with such a good point guard, a true point guard, in every sense of the imagination, a true quarterback on the floor, I think he picked up so much of that from Jalen Suggs. I think Gonzaga is going to see that next year when he's there. I mean, Mark Few's going to love Chet Holmgren, and I'm sure he'll love Hunter Sallis as well. But look out for that first game of the season. Duke plays Gonzaga.
I mean, just a hellacious matchup on Thanksgiving weekend.
It's going to be number 1 versus number 2, almost certainly.
Yeah.
Especially depending on what happens in the rest of the recruiting cycle. But that's a hell of a matchup. The number 1, according to ESPN, according to Draft Express, number 1 and 2 NBA draft guys in the country, number 1 and 2 recruits in the country, NBA draft prospects. We're talking about Powell, Banchero, and Chet Holmgren. So, yeah, it's going to be a great matchup.
And I think that few even had dreams of maybe pairing Banchero and
they got close
in the front court. So
I think if you ask Banchero, he might tell you, if it wasn't Duke, it might have been Gonzaga.
Yeah,
because it was really going to UW. The way that team's a mess.
Yeah, I know.
Lost every game in the Pac-12, or was he going to go to Gonzaga? I have questions.
Yeah, no, it should be a good matchup, and it's a good segue because while most of the guys are committed or even signed to their schools, there are several intriguing prospects still left on the board. Who are the guys in the recruitments that you're still following very closely?
The guy, to me, I mentioned Jaden Hardy earlier. I mean, he's the best player available. You could argue. I think I can make a strong case he's the best player in the country. But he's not going to play college basketball teams, and that's unfortunate. Because he'd be the best player on any team in the country, but he's so advanced. He probably doesn't even need to play college basketball. But the guy I'm really paying attention to is Patrick Baldwin, Jr. recruitment. He's another top 5 player in the country. Kid out of Wisconsin. What makes his recruitment obviously so unique is that the 2 schools that are heavily in the mix for Pat Baldwin are his hometown Milwaukee Panthers and Duke. And you ask yourself, why is he considering Milwaukee? I know he might be from Milwaukee, but Chet Holmgren is from Minnesota, and he wasn't thinking about being a Gopher.
Right? Yeah.
Why his dad played in Minnesota? Why is this guy considering going to Milwaukee? Well, his dad, the coach of Milwaukee, is Pat Baldwin Sr. So, that really adds another layer to that recruitment.
Imagine the conversations in that dinner table where your dad who's the coach of the local school that's trying to recruit you. And he's got a text from Coach K. He says, "What's up?" What do you think Pat Baldwin says when he hears something like that? He's recruiting. He's in the recruiting battle of his life for his own kid against Coach K. I mean, what kind of? That's a crazy story.
Yeah, it's got serious sitcom potential. Serious, movie.
I love that show. I love the show Young Rock. I would love to hear a young Pat Baldwin show. It'd probably be hilarious. Right, great because that's a hell of a story.
I can just imagine say Young Rock or Everybody Hates Chris, a show about Pat Baldwin. That would be a ridiculous show. But that's that's quite the recruiting story. And then when you think about Duke, a lot of people thought he was gonna go to Duke for the last year because he's from Wisconsin. He played on his AAU team with Jalen Johnson and Damian Brakefield, both guys who played at Duke last year. And people assumed, they all played on the same AAU team. Duke gets 2 of those guys. They're going to get Pat Baldwin next year. Despite the fact that his dad goes to Milwaukee. That doesn't always mean anything. But if you saw the way the season played out for Duke, you will have noticed that Jalen Johnson opted out in February. It was I'm not feeling this. If you follow the transfer portal, Damian Brakefield was in the transfer portal and is now going to Ole Miss. So You know, this guy's two AAU teammates played at Duke, and they're no longer
And
there.
bounce. Yeah. Bounce
One guy bounced in
unceremoniously.
season before going to the NBA, and the other guy decides to transfer. Is Pat Baldwin really going to go to Duke? It's not impossible, but I don't know. I would love to see him play at Milwaukee. I've been waiting. It's been a long time since we had the 5-star. I don't know if what's the example of the 5-star, like, no doubt, surefire one and done guy that goes to a legitimate small school, mid-major. We talked about McCord Maker last year. That was a good one,
I mean,
but
honestly,
he wasn't.
you know, like, I don't think he didn't play, but I mean, Mitchell Robinson was
Robinson was a good one. You know, we thought that he would be.
Kentucky.
Yeah, we thought that he would be one and done. He wasn't a top 5 player in the country.
He wasn't as highly touted as Baldwin, but he was no doubt a 5-star and arguably.
And then Stansbury went and got Charles Bassey a couple of years later, you know, to make up for that, which was another good one. And Charles Bassey's been really good at Western Kentucky.
Yeah.
I mean, Rick Stansbury, you know, as Jeff Goodman likes to say, the smart money in recruiting is on Rick Stansbury, whatever that means. But no, I mean, yeah, I don't know of the example. I mean, we hope that a guy like Josh Christopher would have went to Howard last year. They ended up with McCord Maker, which didn't go as well as people would have hoped in the pandemic season. But yeah, this would be a legitimate top 5 player in the country, almost surefire one and done, going to a school in Milwaukee that doesn't have in the normal year, doesn't really have a puncher's chance of winning a tournament game. Ty Washington is another kid who decommitted from Creighton after the whole Greg McDermott situation, you know, before the NCAA tournament. And he had played himself. He was a guy that was a 4-star, you know, when he committed to Creighton, and played himself this last season into a 5-star recruit, and is now on the board. Where he commits will be fascinating as well. You know, Arizona's trying to get him with Tommy Lloyd, LSU, Kentucky. So that'll be another interesting one to follow.
For sure. Now, with the rule this year that players could transfer without having to sit out a year, the transfer portal has really become a key element to recruiting. When it comes to the commitments that we've already seen, which one of these guys are you actually really kind of like looking at and saying this guy may be a huge impact next year?
The transfer to me that caught my attention was, well, first, look, I'm a Memphis fan, so Earl Timberlake leaving Miami. He was a 5-star who just, I mean, he had a dreadful, you know, freshman season, injury riddled, didn't really get a chance to really get off the ground. So look, it's a great reclamation project, I think, for Memphis to see if they can get him healthy and get him, you know, to the player he was, obviously a senior in high school. But the guy that's interesting to me is Adam Miller, a kid from Illinois who decided to transfer to LSU. Obviously, there's been the buzz surrounding the Illinois coaching situation with Orlando Antigua going to Kentucky. We presume it seems like another assistant, Chin Coleman, who's their Chicago guy essentially, is also going to Kentucky. So Calipari, clearly no love for Brad Underwood and what he's built. But Adam Miller was, I believe he started every game for Illinois this season in the backcourt with Ayo Dosunmu, was a 5-star guy coming out of high school. And I thought he played really well. Wasn't the lead guard, but he signed up to play with Ayo Dosunmu. Like, I don't know what you wanted. You weren't going to get the ball in your hands playing with Ayo Dosunmu. Obviously, I know he probably felt like, you know, I'm also not going to be the point guard next year because they already have their point guard situation figured out as well. But look, I think he was a guy that had a chance after given what they lost with Coburn and losing Ayo Dosunmu to be a real number one option for them. And for him to then go and leave, enter the transfer portal, was tough for them. And him ending up at LSU, I think that Will Wade sold him on, well, I don't know. Will Wade could have sold him on a million things. But
From a back, man just sold him on whole cold hard cash. This is be. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say it. I don't care.
Words on the podcast.
I don't care,
we have
man.
the tapes.
The tapes are the tapes, dog. He gave him a strong offer.
But from a basketball perspective,
right?
I'm gonna say that. Look, he sold him on what Cam Thomas did last year. I know we talked about the NBA draft a little bit, earlier this week, not off air, and you talked about how you were very intrigued by Cam Thomas and what he did for LSU this past season. Has to be intriguing for a guy, Adam Miller, who's going to be playing the same 2 spot. Not the ISO scorer that Cam Thomas is, but maybe he is. He just didn't play that role at Illinois because he didn't have the ball in his hands as much. He's more of a spot-up shooter. So we'll see if he has another layer to his game.
Yeah, the one thing you can say about Will Wade is I do feel like he has empowered his offensive players to go get the money in terms of just go get buckets, be aggressive, get up and down the court.
I thought this was another reference to Will Wade's transgression.
No, I mean it was a pun, but it was it was definitely a double entendre, but it was more in terms of him as an actual basketball coach. So I could see maybe him saying that, look, Illinois, we've been a team that kind of had to share the sugar. Next year, you would think that he would kind of be the guy, but they have a strong team coming back next year. Carbella's going to have the ball in his hands. He looks like a real player. I mean, I really like that kid.
Shout out Frazier, he's coming back.
Yeah, shout out Long Island Lutheran, obviously New York area.
Yeah,
but
Luhot.
But to me, Miller may say, look, man, I can go down there to Baton Rouge and get all the shots I want, and we're going to play a lot more of an exciting brand of basketball. Maybe that's what he decided. I think, for me, the 2 guys, to me, I look at Kellen Grady going from Davidson to Kentucky, going through a real rough time, Obviously, they had a rough season, and I think there's even been a hangover from, obviously, the tragic passing of Terrence Clark. We got to make sure we mention Clark, who we talked about a bunch on this podcast, obviously passing away in a car crash. He was slated to be in the NBA draft, certainly would have gotten drafted, probably would have been the first round pick. All that unfortunately went away, so there will be kind of a dark cloud over UK this season. But I think there was initial excitement of someone like Kellen Grady coming in. Grady, you talk about those big time recruits that were went to mid major. Certainly he wasn't a All-American type of guy, but Grady was a touted recruit when he signed on to Davidson. He kind of was, to me, I think for a lot of people, looked at it as the Steph Curry, Steph Curry effect. It was like, Steph Curry and what he accomplished allowed Davidson to get this kid. And Grady had a great career at Davidson. They might have only made tournament once or twice during his time there, maybe once.
There was a feeling, I think, that he stagnated a little bit.
Yeah.
And
it
he had an excellent freshman season, and people thought, oh, this guy's going to be a lottery pick year 2. And he kind of was the same player, it felt like, freshman to senior year.
Yeah, and that's a fair assessment, I think, for Grady. But what I will say is what Kentucky has lacked is stability. And what they have also lacked, I think, is an offensive go-to guy on the wing who you felt like you could consistently go to get buckets. They've had guards, they had big men, but really since Malik Monk, I think they've missed that kind of player. I think Grady coming in, they've had guys, but the guys haven't. Clark struggled. He was injured last year. We know B.J. Watson had a miserable season for the most part. So Grady coming in as a seasoned veteran who knows how to score, playing in Cal's system and having the knowledge that he's had playing under Bob McKillop for all those years. I'm excited to see how he does. And of course, Walker Kessler going from UNC to Auburn. Auburn, I think, Bruce Pearl. Well, Kessler's an interesting player to me because Bruce Pearl doesn't usually recruit a guy like Kessler. Bruce Pearl seems like to get up and down, like the press. So that it's not really conducive to having a bunch of 7-footers. But you could argue maybe that this is maybe makes them more dangerous. That they have a guy now underneath in the paint who can eat guys up. And I think a guy who's motivated. I mean, Kessler, for whatever reason, things were not working out early on at UNC. And then you saw by the end of the year, man, that guy, I don't know what happened to him, but then you started to see, oh, now I know why this guy was a top 10 player coming in and why he was a five-star recruit. And then he bounced. So now I think that's an interesting story of what is Walker Kessler. We'll know next season, but then him going to Auburn, I think is even an additional storyline because that's not the kind of place that I expect to recruit a player like Kessler. So I'm excited to see how those two guys do in their next ventures.
I think another guy, real quick, is a kid Justin Powell, who was at Auburn, who was a big time shooter. They thought he'd be playing with Sharife Cooper, and for the first 2 months of the season, he had to play the point guard, even though he's really more of a two guard who could really shoot the basketball. He decided to transfer. He also dealt with some injury issues when Cooper came back, so he never really even got to play together. But he decided to transfer. All these transfers, I'm just like, a lot of these situations, I'm like, I don't even know why. But they decided to enter the portal. We'll never really know. But, and what's interesting about him is that he decided to go in conference and transfer to Tennessee. So now Tennessee gets a shooter in Justin Powell that I feel like they haven't had really in the Rick Barnes era. They've had good guards, they've had good basketball players, but you get a high-level shooter in Powell, along with Kevin Chandler, who they're bringing in next year, and you're bringing back Josiah Jordan James, and this is going to be a good Tennessee team. So that's another team you're going to have to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I think I think shooting has really been their weakness. It's been the only thing. It's been the only way you beat Tennessee to me is you force them to shoot threes and just pray that they don't go in. So yeah.
Now they have a zone buster.
Yeah, exactly. Transfers that are left still on the docket. Who are guys you look at and say you're intrigued to see where this guy will end up, and guys you think are still have great value because there are plenty of them out there.
Yeah, that's the one thing you'll learn when you look at who's in the transfer portal. Like, man, there's a lot of guys still on the board. I'm intrigued by. Look, Marcus Bagley is obviously very interesting because another guy didn't expect him to enter the portal, but he also entered the draft. I really don't know what he'd be looking for if he decided to transfer. At a school like Arizona State, I would imagine he would have been one of the go-to guys on a team that would have been pretty decent. Now entering the portal, I feel like he's a guy that could go anywhere. He's good enough to play anywhere. So there's plenty of teams that I'm sure will be going after him. A kind of not a sleeper name because this guy was a 5-star recruit, but Bryce Thompson, a kid from Kansas who decided to transfer from Oklahoma. He's from Oklahoma. I wonder if he decides to stay in conference as well and go to a school like OK State, where they had all the success that they had with Kate Cunningham this past season, or does he decide to go to OU, where obviously we got Porter Moser, and the success that he had at Loyola now coming down to Norman. We'll see what he does, but he's a guy that people thought would really be a bucket getter for Kansas last year, and just very raw. You can tell just not ready to dominate the college basketball level, which you get sometimes. And similar, kind of reminds me of the Quentin Grimes situation, where Quentin Grimes went to Kansas as a 5-star, wasn't able to dominate right away, and then went to not even a lower level, a little bit of a lower level, but just a school where the pressure wasn't as intense as it was in Kansas, and he became, a conference player of the year. So I think I look for something similar for Bryce Thompson if he decides to leave the Big 12, or even if he decides to stay in the Big 12. You're talking about a guy I think that could be really, really good.
No, yeah, I think Thompson will be an interesting player considering the hot billing he had coming out of high school. For me, Marcus Carr from Minnesota, really dynamic guard. He was kind of doing everything for Minnesota. If he can get to a program that a little more stable, a little more help, I think that he could really help a lot. Because the guy is a fearless scorer. He's strong, good ball handler, good passer. he's just a good player. He was kind of just stuck in a bad situation, and you love to see those. To me, I love to see those guys who get out of bad situations where they're great players. They're never going to be able to, break through at Minnesota, considering how tough the Big Ten is. If he can get to a contender somewhere, he could really change and make a big difference for our program. Someone ends up with him. And I'm also Quincy Guerriere, also from Syracuse. Syracuse went on a really great run in the NCAA tournament. Guerriere, a little bit of an undersized big man, but he's very jumpy and bouncy around the basket. Good hands. He's actually displayed a little bit of a three-point shot this past season. I'm curious to see where he goes and how he can impact a team in the front court. So those are two guys that I see still on the board that I think could really help a team if they go to the right situation. Let's talk about also to wrap up here these coaching hires. What coaching hires do you look at that intrigue you? We had a pretty active coaching carousel. I mean, we had 2 blue bloods that had openings, several other majors. Well, 3, I guess. Yeah, I would say 3 maybe. Because I forgot.
Who were the 3 for all the fans out there?
Indiana,
all the Cincinnati fans that are like, we're a blue blood, right? Yeah, Wes Miller going to Cincinnati.
I included Indiana, North Carolina, and Arizona. That was in my head.
Okay.
I forgot Arizona when I first mentioned 2.
Sorry, Marquette fans.
Yeah, sorry, Marquette. I would not count you guys. But we had a lot of blue bloods and then a lot of big programs. I mean, even the ones that aren't. I mean, again, Texas and OU, those are big basketball programs. I know they know football more often. Marquette is not a small school. So what a coaching hire do you think was most intriguing to you?
I talked about Tommy Lloyd earlier, so I'll leave him out of this. But that one obviously is very interesting. I'm gonna go with Mike Woodson to Indiana. To me, like Mike Woodson, look, the Brad Stevens stuff was talked about. As a Celtics fan, there was a moment. EJ remembers the day. There was a day where I was like, man, I think Stevens is going to Indiana. I don't know what the Celtics are gonna do. The season's been a complete mess. There was a day there where I thought he was going, and it just didn't happen, and I'm glad it didn't. The rumor now from Woj was that he was offered $70 million and he turned it down. But Mike Woodson, that was a hire that I think people were confused by. You had the subsequent news that they were also bringing Thad Matta in as sort of in an administrative role, in a bit of a desk job. But it's fine when you consider the fact that Thad Matta, can really, kind of teach Mike Woodson the college game. Mike Woodson knows basketball. He knows just as much, if not way more basketball than even Thad Matta knows when it comes to X's and O's. But when it comes to, knowing the right people, especially in the state of Indiana, this is the guy that when he went from Xavier to Ohio State, was able to get Mike Conley and Greg Oden out of the state of Indiana. Greg Oden, the first best prospect since LeBron. He was able to get that guy to leave the state of Indiana and go to Ohio State. So Thad Matta knows how to get guys. Got a guy like D'Angelo Russell from Louisville to go to Ohio State as well, which Louisville isn't Indiana necessarily, but it's very, very close. So I feel like from a recruiting standpoint, Mike Woodson, how much does his name carry? It carries for really old Indiana fans, and it carries for, Knicks fans, I guess, and Hawks fans. So I'm sure he might be able to actually get guys in the Atlanta region. He might be able to get guys in the New York region. How well does his name carry nationally? We'll find out. And does that even matter? Because Leonard Hamilton isn't a household name, but Leonard Hamilton's a hell of a recruiter.
Yeah, Leonard Hamilton still gets dudes. It don't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. He's not the crazy. He's not the the most wild personality. He's not a household name, but he's able to get guys. So, what does that even matter for Mike Woodson? And again, from a coaching perspective, he comes in day one. You would think will be a top 4 coach in the Big Ten. And that might be selling him short. So, if Indiana gets players, which they were able to keep Trace Jackson Davis, and Christian Lander for this past season. They just got a commitment from a late kid this year, in Emoni Bates, who's a 4-star, decommitted from Texas, and is now going to Indiana. And Mike Woodson might be cooking with gas. We'll see.
Oh, yeah.
We'll see whether or not he'll be able to get the top guys. But I thought that was a shrewd hire by Indiana. It was confusing, I think, initially, but once you start reading the reasons why they brought him in, and you start seeing some of the stuff, it starts to make more sense.
Yeah, I know Mike Woodson was my pick. I mean, I agree. I think that Woodson, and one thing I don't think you really mentioned in that whole thing too was, Woodson's represented by CAA, and
very close to that agency.
Yeah, he's very close. He's been representing them for a very long time. There's a lot of connections there, and I think of I'm a Knicks fan, so I'm seeing Worldwide West, bear hugging Tom Thibodeau, and remembering that Thibodeau was bear hugging Mike Woodson just a couple weeks ago after he had already accepted the job. He had showed up sitting front row at Madison Square Garden at Knicks game. I mean, that stuff matters, man. Like it matters on the high school level.
He was in the Knicks family box with all the CAA guys, the Leon Rose.
Yeah.
He was like Mike Woodson.
There's a lot of people who may think that don't mean nothing. I'm here to tell you that means a lot. Yes, it means a lot, not just in the NBA, in college basketball.
You know who the coach that Leon Rose and Worldwide West are most closest to in college basketball? Is John Calipari.
Right.
And what has that been able to get John Calipari? I could probably... I wouldn't know, because a lot of the stuff is under the table. Under the table. A lot of stuff is not public information.
Right.
But I can guarantee you that at least 10 of the guys that John Calipari got that we know as 5-star, one-and-done guys are largely due to his relationship with Leon Rose and Worldwide West.
Of course. So the idea that now...
Just look, Carl Anthony Towns and Devin Booker are two of his most high-profile clients.
Exactly.
So
and look, and now their second favorite coach in college basketball is now Mike Woodson. So
he's coaching at Indiana. Like, it's not like he's coaching at, Butler.
Yeah, exactly. So Indiana, you may look out, man. You may look out. I'm not gonna, jinx it. Kind of. There wasn't a lot of optimism when this hire was made, but I actually thought it was a pretty solid hire given where Indiana is, which is nowhere. I mean, they're just like we've talked about it on this podcast before. I mean, they're not relevant. So Woodson, and then to me, like the connections and stuff will help with recruiting. And then I believe any NBA coach comes to college basketball he's top 3 in his conference just walking.
Again, look at Leonard
Hamilton. Walking in. I don't care who's in it. You coaching the NBA and you've won, you better than most of the coaches coaching college basketball.
Yeah.
So that to me is an interesting situation, and I think it has a lot of upside. The other major hire I thought that was interesting, I had Tommy Lloyd too, and we did talk a lot about Lloyd. But the other one I would say is Hubert Davis at North Carolina, because I feel like North Carolina kind of is in a weird position right now. I mean, the bottom didn't completely fall out by the end for Roy Williams, but if now that we know this was the end of Roy Williams' career, when we look back at the last 3 years since he won a national championship, it don't look that great. It don't look that great.
You had the Nasir Little season. You had the Cole Anthony season.
It looks mighty suspect. Like, I guess in our eyes, we didn't think he was going to retire. So we were like, oh, in a couple bad years, he'll be back. But now when you look at, okay, that was the end, now you see how long that end was in terms of how long they struggled. And you're like, oh, okay. Hubert Davis may have a little bit of work cut out for him here. They get players. It's Carolina. It recruits itself. Anybody who coaches there gets players. But what happened there for where they went from being the national champion, national championship appearances back-to-back years to just a regular ACC team, which is what they've been. And so Hubert Davis coming in, he was part of that staff. So I'm very curious to see how he gets that thing turned around.
I mentioned this on our podcast when we talked about Hubert Davis getting hired, and the similarities to what you see in college football when Bob Stoops left Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley took over, or when Urban Meyer left Ohio State. Well, he left, got kicked out. of Ohio State and Ryan Day takes over, how they were able to hit the ground running initially because there was already a talent base and the program has the cachet that it has. But what I think those guys did so well, and why Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley have two programs that are in the top 5 right now in college football, is they evolved from their mentor, the predecessors, formula. They took their formula, they took a lot of aspects of it, and they evolved it. Lincoln Riley's not running the exact same. He's running a similar offense because he's the offensive coordinator, but now they're actually getting 5. He's building his programs around 5-star or elite transfer quarterbacks in a way that Bob Stoops was never worried about the quarterback position like that. Ryan Day is now running a different offense at Ohio State than Urban Meyer ran, despite the fact that Urban Meyer he was an offensive coordinator there. Now they're running a different offense. So when I think about college basketball, I look at Hubert Davis and I hope that Hubert Davis doesn't take this job and say, I'm just going to do everything that Roy Williams did. Because like you said, it wasn't working at the championship level. It was working enough to where they weren't going to stink.
Yeah, it was good enough to get an 8 or 9 seed in the tournament,
Yeah.
Or maybe you get a game in the first round, maybe, but it was a first round exit. It was a first.
Like you're looking across Tobacco Road, and you see that's what's going to be so fascinating about this Hubert Davis situation, because we've been looking so long at like a Roy Williams, Mike Krzyzewski, like that's what Tobacco Road has been.
Yeah, and like Roy Williams is like one of the few people you look at in college basketball and say he's an equal to Coach K.
He's an absolute equal.
Yeah,
like there's no qualms about that statement. There's almost no one you can say that about besides maybe him. Now Calipari.
Yeah,
and maybe Self. Yeah, like those are maybe the only guys.
And maybe Izzo. Those would be the only guys.
Yeah, maybe Izzo and even Boeheim. I'm like, I don't know if he's an equal.
I'm not saying. I don't think he is.
I think he might be, especially now. I think he might be a rung below.
Yeah.
But like now you're going from that to Hubert Davis, coach. And it's a guy who's never been a head coach before.
Yeah.
So that's what's going to be so fascinating. It's not to say Hubert Davis. It can be anybody that's coming and being a first year head coach. It could be, again, Penny Hardaway. It could have been. If they went and got Luke Walton to be the coach, I would have been like, This is like a guy, I don't know anything about this guy as a head coach, and now this guy is going to be coaching against, he's going to be looked at on the same level as Coach K and expected to be as successful as Coach K at Duke. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough job. It's why those jobs, when a guy, you're replacing the legend, is always tough.
Yeah.
But it's particularly tough when the legend is still across Tobacco Road.
Yeah, he's still getting the number 2 and 3 guy in the class. That he's still got it. That's what makes it even more of a challenge. There.
The one wild card I want to throw out there, smaller hire, was Penn State going and hiring my guy Micah Shrewsbury, who was an assistant at Purdue most recently. But before that was the long-time Brad Stevens apprentice. Was with him with the Celtics for the last 5 or 6 years prior to his time in Purdue. Coached Tatum and Brown and Smart and Isaiah Thomas and all those guys. And before that, obviously, was with him at Butler. Michael Shrewsbury is a smart dude. And Penn State basketball, I mentioned this when they got rid of Pat Chambers. That, first of all, talk about, addition by subtraction. No disrespect to Pat Chambers, but I don't know. I'm not gonna say no disrespect to Pat Chambers, but
I'm just gonna say nothing. I'm just gonna say nothing and be kind to Pat Chambers today.
Exactly. You just like no comment, but Mike Shrewsbury. I told you when they got rid of Pat Chambers that I thought Penn State was a bit of a sleeping giant, considering the weight. As someone who lives in Pennsylvania, the weight that the Penn State University name has in the state.
Yeah.
That although in basketball circles it may not run as strong as it does in football, there are still people.
It certainly doesn't.
It's not a may. It certainly does not.
Yeah, 100%.
There are still people in the state where if you are an elite basketball player, one of the first schools that you should be considering is Penn State.
Yeah, Penn State calls it. When Penn State calls, it means something, whether you go there or not. If you,
right?
Yeah, you lived in Pennsylvania even not longer than I have. But I lived there obviously for a long time as well. You feel it. It's different. It's totally different than you wouldn't know it if you don't live in the state. So it's just a matter of getting the right guy in there, and maybe they have.
There are legitimate hoopers in the state of Pennsylvania.
100%. Yeah.
This isn't. We're not talking about. We're not talking about Iowa. No disrespect to Iowa basketball. Iowa actually has a pretty decent basketball pipeline as well, but. Obviously you have the Philly pipeline, which Penn State hasn't really been able to capitalize on much of. They got a couple of guys like Tony Carr, who ended up being an NBA guy recently. I believe he was from Philly. But, a kid like Jalen Duren, Penn State should have been on his top 10. Were they on his top 10? He just released it, and I don't think they were. But if they were, actually, they might have been on his top 10.
Okay.
But that just shows you, like Penn State with a new coach who had 2 weeks to recruit Jalen Duren, and now they're in his top 10. It's not because he loves Michael Shrewsbury. It's because it's Penn State. So you're not going to leave them off the list. If you're a kid like Jalen Duren, Cam Reddish, they were on his final list. You want to change that from on the final list to being able to get those guys. Like Anthony Edwards was able to, like Tom Crean was able to get Anthony Edwards. And once that happens, and don't overlook the fact that Michael Shrewsbury hired as a part of his staff Brian Snow, who's a recruiting expert from 247 Sports. He hired him as his quote unquote director of recruiting. I don't know what that means, but Brian Snow is going to be just as connected as anybody when it comes to knowing AAU directors and things across the country. So don't be surprised if Penn State's an NCAA tournament team in a couple of years.
And just to be clear, Penn State was indeed on his list. That top 11 included Villanova, which again, Pennsylvania, any kid Villanova's going to be on there. Michigan, Miami, Auburn, Alabama, Kentucky, UCLA, NBL, the G League, Memphis, and the Nittany Lions. So,
at least it doesn't have the German flag and the Chinese flag like it did for Michael Foster. Where I was like, all right, so that guy's never playing college basketball. When I see 10 schools and 4 of them are countries.
Yeah, that country flags in there. That's not good. Man, so good to be back, Kendall, talking college basketball, high school recruiting. Again, if you want to continue to hear these conversations, make sure you subscribe to the channel, New Generation Media on YouTube. Make sure you follow us. Also on our audio channels. We are obviously a podcast on New Generation Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and TuneIn. Again, you don't see too many people doing high school basketball recruiting, in-depth analysis, and commentary like we are doing here at New Generation Media. And if you want to keep enjoying it, make sure you keep it locked here. Again, hit that subscribe button to get more of these podcasts. And, of course, check out our audio podcast as well. But thank you guys so much for checking us out, man. We'll be back hopefully another month to talk some more college basketball and high school basketball. This was episode 8 of The Uncommitted. For Kendall, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.